This podcast may contain adult themes.
This podcast is for entertainment purposes only.
The views and opinions in this podcast are expressly our own.
Honestly, every time I try to do something fun or exciting, you make it not that way.
Is it okay if I kick your boss's ass? That won't affect your workplace chemistry, will it?
All right, who did this? I'm not mad. I just want to know who did it so I can punish them.
When I get to the workplace, I like to fuck shit up.
Welcome to Let's Break Up, Toxic Workplace Stories, hosted by me, Nicola.
And me, Gina, both with many years working in corporate roles. Come along as we interview some awesome guests from around the world about their experiences with toxic workplaces.
Sharing lessons learned and providing safe, supportive place to share their stories with those who might be experiencing similar situations.
Each week, we will provide tips and ways to identify some of the challenges associated with toxic workplaces.
In today's episode, I think our pre-chat's going to be low game today, considering that my eyeballs literally feel like they're falling out of my face.
Yeah. So, hey, how are
Good
you?
morning.
Your eyeballs are falling out of your face because you've had what, like a couple of
We've had some early mornings during some interviews.
Yeah, it's true. I know. And the
and-
days that we record, I feel like sometimes I do, like you mentioned, you felt a little like manic. It's like we can sometimes kind of go down the recording rabbit hole, and then we're like, oh my God, we have all this other stuff we have to do, like our regular work. And it does make me feel a little manic. I get it. Sometimes it's like that.
It is, but it's okay.
Especially as a single mom, you know? Yeah.
She's single
All right.
mom.
So single moms unite. It's rough sometimes.
I am pretty excited. This over here is Joanna, and Joanna has an amazing podcast of her own. She's just informed us she also has a TV show
which we think is very fancy.
We're thinking like this is pretty fancy. So I'm going to hand it over to Joanna, and I'm sure she's got an amazing blurb to share with us all.
Yeah. Tell us who you are, Joanna. Hi. Welcome.
Hi, and thank you for having me here. It's an honor to be here with you guys. So yeah, I'm Joanna. I'm not a single mum. I'm a step mother and a step grandmother. So never had any of my own, but I've managed to accumulate a kind of family around me. So I knew from fairly early on in life that I was different, but I didn't know how I was different. And it wasn't until my 30s till I took the Myers-Briggs type indicator, which most introverts use that as the way to find out what's different about them. Found out I was an introvert, but what that didn't help me was how to play to my strengths as an introvert. What it showed me was the difference between extroverts and introverts. So now I had a blueprint to follow of how to be more like those people that seem to be really successful. So I pretended to be extroverted for a good couple of decades, actually, until I hit burnout. And that's when I thought something has to change. And so since 2018, actually, alongside my traditional training coaching business, I've got this niche where I'm focusing on enabling introverts to flourish without pretending to be something they're not. And I'm rattling the cages of organizations and educational establishments to shake out the extroversion bias that exists pretty much everywhere in everyday practices and processes, which is what makes workplaces toxic for introverts.
Tell me a little bit more about this extroversion bias, because now I'm a little bit curious about this.
Well, I think I get what Joanna's saying, because I was trying to be, at the company we met at, I was trying to be something I wasn't. Like, I'm straightforward, I'm to the point, I'm assertive. And they wanted me, I don't know if you heard our first couple episodes, Joanna, but they wanted me to fluff all the emails. And I was like, it was exhausting. And I understand that introvert burnout. But yeah, tell us more about the bias, please.
So somewhere, and I have no idea where it started, some bright spark decided that extroversion was the ideal, was the norm, was what we ought to go for. So people pushing themselves forward, speaking up, being fun, being loud and larger than life, which plays straight into the extrovert ideal, but undermines often the confidence of introverts, because it's like, I can't be like that and sustain it. I can do it for a while, but I can't do it and sustain it. So then we look a bit deeper at recruitment processes. We get asked questions like, what kind of team player are you? And introverts feel pressured to say, oh, I rub along just fine with everyone, and I'm, I'll be in there mucking out with everybody else. Whereas actually,
realistically, they're thinking, I just want to poke my eyes up with pencils.
Realistically, we're just thinking, leave me alone and let me get my work done. That's how the best I work.
Absolutely. And so what we need to do as introverts is, when we're asked that question, rather than play to the extroversion bias, we need to say things like, well, do you know what? I'll be probably one of the quieter team members, but don't let that fool you, because what I'll be doing is listening and noticing what's not being said and assimilating ideas and being able to summarize. And there's often not enough of that going on in a team. So that's how I add value. And what we need to do is start expressing and articulating our strengths in positive terms, not apologizing for them. And then there's assessment processes. And if you've ever been through that, you'll know that there's some kind of debate thing that happens, a round table kind of conversation. And people get marked as to how often they contribute, not the quality of what they contribute. So again, introverts will get marked down. And then there's the whole kind of succession process and career planning, where if you want to get on here, you've got to make sure that you're visible, that people know who you are, blah, blah, blah. In other words, just be more extroverted. And many of us have been told that for so long that we start to believe not only we're different, but there's something wrong with who we are. We end up feeling not enough. That is the effect of the extroversion bias.
I mean,
Yes.
I identify with that a lot. Yeah. I mean, that kind of like summarizes how I felt at where we met, Nicola. Yeah.
But I've never actually thought of it as a bias, right? I've never actually taken the time to think of it as a bias, because you're right. It is very assimilated in that thinking around extroverts are what get you ahead in workplaces. And it's why I'm such a great ambivert. I'm absolutely an introvert at home, but the minute you put me in an environment, I play extrovert very well. Nailed it. And I think, and it's exhausting. Like, I get so exhausted, and I absolutely.
How did you do it for like 3 or 4 years?
Because I'm good at. I'm good at.
When you try and tell people that actually you're an introvert, they go, "No, you're not. I've seen you on the stage. I've seen you at conferences. I've seen, So people don't understand the difference between behavior and between energy needs, and that's what differentiates introverts and extroverts. It's not the behavior. We can all choose and learn how to behave however we want. The thing that distinguishes us is, when our batteries are draining, do we seek social interaction, busy environments, lots of noise and clamor, or do we say, I sneak away and I'm now recharging quietly on my own? That's the difference between an introvert and an extrovert. And many of us, like me, I'm an extroverted introvert. So I am through and through introvert, but I have access to some of those extrovert behaviors that mean that I don't get drained as quickly doing some things that maybe a classic introvert would.
I feel like I'm classic introvert, because I like go out and do one thing, and then I'm like, okay, I just want to go home and like sit and like do my own thing, sleep, read, whatever, not communicate with anyone. Which can be hard, especially if you're, a manager of a team. And, bringing it back to the workplace Nicola and I were at, I had no time, and I know you didn't either. There was always Slack messages going off. Like, there was no time to take a breather. Does that lead us into sort of how the introvert bias and, not being your authentic self, how that's toxic? Can you talk to us about what happens in that situation?
Yeah, so partly because many of us have had to pretend in order to fit in and get on, which is what I did, and it sounds like it's what Nicola did as well, and she did it probably better than I did.
She was good.
Because that's what many of us have to do, we then get that overwhelming sense of, I'm not being true to my authentic self. I'm not good enough as who I am, then we start to experience all those things that people typically do with a toxic workplace, which is, I don't really want to go in there. I don't feel safe. So psychological safety is missing, because if we look at the first layer of psychological safety and it's about inclusion, I'm not included. Because I'm not able to be myself. If I am, people make fun of me. People tell me I'm stuck up. People tell me I'm arrogant. I was once called dull as, I'll let you fill in the gap.
I was called condescending. Just
absolutely.
Like the first time I met my team, one of the team members were like, "You're being very condescending." And I just was like, "I'm just talking." Like, I don't know why it's coming off that way, but I'm just talking. It was like very awkward for me. But okay, so how else does that create toxicity?
So then there's the kind of the interaction with the team. So you mentioned your team, and I think what we forget is up to 50% of any population identifies as an introvert. So we think we're the minority. You're thinking your team needs someone kind of, who's going to lead from the front and all of that. Half the team potentially are saying, thank goodness for that. We've got someone who is quieter, who is calmer, who listens, who prepares, who actually gives us time to prepare before a meeting rather than springing meetings on us and expecting us to make decisions on the hoof. So there are all those things that work against us and make the workplace toxic. I noticed that I would look ahead in my calendar and see appointments, and I could feel my heart sink, thinking I know exactly what that meeting's going to be like. I know who's going to dominate. I'm going to be working really hard to try and get my point across. And to do that authentically takes much more energy. So ultimately, what the result of the toxic workplace is we hit overwhelm, and from overwhelm we can slip quickly into introvert hangover, and from and that's all of the worst things of a hangover with no booze, and then introvert burnout, which my last episode took me well over 3 months to recover from. And all because we don't feel safe in this toxic workplace that many managers and leaders think isn't toxic at all, because that's the ideal that we're aiming for.
This kind of just highlights to me that bias where I've been conditioned to think in a certain way. And it's now just kind of I'm like, oh, babe, have I just become the toxic person? Am I that toxic leader? Oh, no.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy because, we're in, well, for me, I was in corporate America, and it's exactly what Joanna was saying. I was more of the focused, quiet one, just like kind of wanting to just plow through my work and get it done. And I was labeled like a workhorse because I would just like sit there and focus and just plow through it. But then in meetings, like I wouldn't necessarily speak up, and I wasn't getting, talked to about, hey, do you want to like try to go for this promotion or something? That never happened because I tended to just be like, stick to myself. I didn't think that workplace was toxic, but I think my point with Nicholas is that I think that it was clearly rewarded. The extrovert behavior was rewarded. So I just thought, oh, well, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. But it helped me, like, condition me when I became manager to also favor and reward the extroverts without even knowing.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we look at all those typical signs of people who are experiencing toxicity in the workplace, you and I will have experienced those things, but just not thought of it as a toxic workplace.
When you look at the Myers-Briggs stuff, what were you on Myers-Briggs, Joanna?
I'm an ISFP.
Oh, so super sensing.
Yeah, I have never done a Myers-Briggs test.
Wait. I think you need to, and then we need to post this to the page. I'm INTJ.
Like literally people are like I remember I like dabbled in online dating for like a hot minute. And people were like, I'm EMCF. What are you? And I'm like, Gina? I'm like, I have no idea what these letters are. Like, I knew it was referring to the Myers-Briggs, but I like, Nicola, you're on top of your shit. You just like know exactly what it means. And I'm just like, sounds good. Bunch of letters thrown together. Love that.
So I've got a
So it's
questionnaire that builds on Myers-Briggs and helps people understand what type of introvert they are. So it strips out the how we take in information, how we make decisions, and which of those processes we prefer, and just says, let's look at your introvert type. And that's why we know there are 6 types of introverts and many blends. So Gina, you said you might be a classic introvert. I happen to be an open introvert. I reckon if Nicola took the questionnaire, she would be an engaging, sociable, connected introvert. So again, once you've got a blend like that, people are going to say there's no way you're an introvert, because they don't understand that when the batteries are draining, you're away, you're out of there.
I remember that somebody in our toxic workplace wanted to talk about something specific with me, and I just kept saying, like, I can't focus on this right now. I have like something else to focus on. I was like, we could talk about it later. And she just like wouldn't stop asking me to talk about it. And I don't know if this is like part of the toxicity that I brought to our workplace, but I just was like, okay, fine, do whatever you want. Like, I just had it. Like, I was like, okay, well, just do it your way. Even though it did need a discussion, I just was like, yep, sure, sounds good.
So once we don't have the capacity to engage, to make decisions, then what we're very likely to do is just say, get on with it. And
like,
that's
just shut down. Because I just was like I was very clear. I was like, I can't focus on this right now. And she just kept going. And I just got so frustrated that like she wasn't respecting that boundary. Like, I was very clear. I was like, I don't have time to focus on this right now. We'll figure it out at another time. So how does an introvert sort of navigate any of these corporate situations where they might not be considered the shining star?
I think one of the most important things is for introverts to get used to owning their introversion without apology. Because if we do represent, and the stats show it's something like 48% in the UK, 52% in the US. Now, I always think of the US as a more extroverted society, which to me means there are just more people pretending in the US than even in the UK. So I think the thing to do is and Susan Cain did a great job with her book Quiet, but to make it discussable, to help people realize that it's an aspect of neurodiversity, because we're wired differently. We're not weird, we're wired differently. So actually what we need to do is, as managers and leaders, is understand that actually people do have different needs. As introverts, we tend to have a different communication process. We tend to be think, say, think, whereas extroverts are say, think, say, and not necessarily, they don't think through what they're saying necessarily. They may not be attached to it. Whereas by the time most introverts get to say something, it's well considered and exactly what they mean. And if we're pushed to give a response, it can make us really uncomfortable, because we're probably saying something that hasn't been thought through, that we don't yet know that we mean. So it can be really stressful.
One of the things that I've picked up as a really hot tip for me as your local ambivert was, if someone throws those left field questions at you, you pause and you go, great question. I don't have the answer with me right now. Can I come back to you on that?
I was going to say there's 2 other tips that I'd add to that, which I found work very well for introverts. One is to use a placeholder. So quite often, I know I want to say something now, I just don't know what it is I want to say. So rather than losing my place in the conversation, because quite often the conversation moves on, and by the time I've thought, we're on to a different topic. So I will actually put my stake in the ground and say, that's a really good point. And actually, as I'm thinking that through, I notice that there are a couple of trains of thought I have. All the while my mouth is doing this, my head is frantically working out what it is I actually want to say. But I've stayed in the conversation. I've got the mic still, as it was. And for me, that was an incredibly important thing to do. And the other is, of course, a bit of a pre-frame. I find both of those things really useful to do, to make sure that I'm heard and I'm in the conversation. So I think those three tips together are really powerful.
I had a good question and then we got sidetracked.
Derailed.
Derailed. Yeah.
You should have
one
used
of
your
my-
stake in the ground.
I know. But that's the other thing. I'm very easily distracted by fun, shiny, pretty things. So like if it's like a fun conversation, I'm like, oh, okay, let's go over here and just listen to it. So one of the things I've learned that I have to do, like as what I believe I am an introvert, I have to reread my emails because granted, sometimes while there's no tone in my email, it can be very like fact-based and just like disseminate information, and not everyone is okay with that. So I have to go back and actually like 99.9 times out of 10 I have to add the greeting. I usually never add a greeting. Like I just am like right into what we need to talk about and just keep it like that. And so I have to go back in and like add a greeting like, hey, hey Nicola, how are you? Whatever, minimal, but my desire is just to go right into the meat and potatoes of it. And I don't need any of this extraneous stuff. Granted, when we were at the workplace we were at, it had to be a lot more than just like a hi, so-and-so. Like I had to go into it.
Yeah, we had to toxic positivity, everything.
I couldn't do it. Do it. But so for me, one tip was that I learned over time is even though there may not be tone to your email or your electronic communication of, I am whatever you guys are working with Slack, people will still read into it no matter what. But I don't know, is that also indicative of being an introvert, like what we're talking about? And what are there any other, the other thing I want to talk about is, how has remote working affected the introvert?
Ooh, good question.
Yeah, because you were saying something, Joanna, and I was like, okay, this all sounds like you're talking about like in person, and now our world is not always in person. It's like 50% in person at best.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So I'll answer the second question first and see if I can remember the first question to go back to it. I'm one of those rare beasts who actually enjoy remote working. I enjoyed lockdown. Because I didn't have to put up with all the distractions. So I'm a coach and trainer by day. I was traveling the world, working on whatever client site I was. And when I gave my delegates a break mid-morning, lunchtime, mid-afternoon, they would all swan off and have a coffee and do something nice. And somebody would collar me. And so I would never get a break until the end of the day. And one of the things I've enjoyed about eventually, because I had that scary week where I watched my whole calendar for 18 months just empty as all of my clients cancelled their training. And then it took about 3 weeks before my first client came back and said, can we do this on Zoom? Yes, we can. And I'm still, I've done 2 face-to-face. The rest is all Zoom. And when I give the delegates a break, I get a break too. Mm-hmm. So I'm really happy still delivering over Zoom. And many introverts, I know there was a lot of stuff going around. Introverts the world over have been waiting for lockdown. It's their idea of heaven. Well, yes and no. Most of us got more work done because we didn't have the interruptions. We didn't have the chatter in an open plan office to contend with. So most of us did manage to get more work done. But we're introverts, not misanthropes. We don't hate people. We need connection with the right people. And so where we were struggling during lockdown was when we couldn't see those people who help nourish us, who help to actually refill us, who help recharge our batteries. And we spent so long on Zoom, there was a recognized Zoom fatigue with people getting fed up with looking at their faces on the screen. Well, frankly, if you're looking at your faces, you're looking at the wrong place, because the only place you have connection is the camera, not down there at your face. So, I know it was a struggle, but most introverts I work with are the ones who are choosing to do more in the kind of agile working, more working from home than they are going into the office. They don't miss the commute. They don't miss the hustle and bustle of the city streets. They don't miss the hour and a half drive, whatever it happens to be,
Mm.
actually they're really good working from home.
So do you think now being remote is, or 50% remote, to make a generalization? I know there's a lot of hybrid. Like I am 100% remote. What are you, Nicola? You're hybrid?
At the moment, I'm pretty hybrid. So I'll
Yeah.
do 2 to 3 days in the office,
office,
and
yeah.
then the rest of the time's at home, which is
Yeah.
actually really good because it means I can recharge, because I spend most of my time in the office extroverting.
I guess I'm just curious, like, how has it affected extroverts? Do you know, like how?
Oh, you know what? I can actually answer this because I've got
Okay.
a friend of mine who
Mhm.
is an absolutely beautiful human, and she is a notorious natural extrovert. She gets energy from people, and people just absolutely love her, and they can suck all her energy out, and it just replenishes. It's like a little energizer battery. It's fantastic, but she's just a lovely human being, and absolutely she gets her energy from people. And she absolutely hated lockdown because she couldn't touch people, she couldn't see people. She liked that office chatter, she liked, you know, that interaction with people, the interpersonal relationships, that connection. I think it's almost this hybrid environments kind of created a really positive environment for the extroverts because they can come in and get their energy, but it's also created a really positive environment for the introverts where we can go home and be like, oh my God, yes, no people, I can do my work today, thank you.
Yeah, I know.
The
Like I get
challenge,
excited when I have like no scheduled meetings for like my day, which is like, you know, maybe once a week I'll have one day where I don't have to talk to someone on the phone or Zoom or whatever. And I'm like, ooh, that's a nice day. I'm like, oof.
I think one of the challenges is that it tends to be the extroverts who are demanding people go back into the office because we can't be a team unless we're all together, which is nonsense. We've had global teams operating for decades. So why all of a sudden now can we not have effective team working? And it's because the extroverts want everyone back in the office so that they're replenishing, and they can't understand the other half of the population who say, I'm fine, I'm actually really good, thank you.
But I wonder if that's more projection of, hey, I'm an extrovert, I'm not as productive as at home because I'm interpersonal, so now everybody's not productive at home, whereas we're all like, we're getting our most productive work done in these locations, surrounded by our stuff that we love.
I think you're absolutely right. Absolutely right.
One of the things we've been talking about recently is now that we are in this hybrid space, we're losing a lot of office space, right? Like we're just dead space in offices. But then that tells me, you know, I started looking into research because we've had open plan offices for what, like 10 years. And I've started to see a lot more research come out saying that actually open plan offices are not as positive as people originally thought they were going to be. They're not as collaborative as they originally thought they were going to be. And that there's all of these, you know, we spoke about it earlier, these psychological safety issues that come with open plan offices. So I'm curious to know, or curious to hear what you think around introverts in that open plan office environment, because pretty much every office is now open plan.
Yeah, and it started a lot longer ago than we think, actually. And it came out of the 1950s and the whole kind of economies of scale and factory, a sense of factory productivity. So it's been around for way too long. And you're right, the research is showing that people are not as productive. But of course, it's better use of space. So you can get more bodies in an open plan space than you can into smaller offices and cubicles. The reality is that most introvert clients that I work with hate open plan offices because they need quiet space in order to focus and do their best work. And they've got phone conversations going on one side, chat about football or the weekend and the barbecue on the other side, and then somebody throwing a hissy fit over there. So there's just too much going on. And one of the things about introverts is that we are already overstimulated mentally. That's why we don't need the additional mental stimulation. And what does an open plan office give you? tons of mental stimulation. So we get overstimulated and therefore overwhelmed really quickly. So most introverts would rather book themselves a quiet space, even go to a coffee shop where actually, you know, there's just a more hushed conversation going on than all the noisy stuff around. So most introverts would rather have an office with a door that's shut, and they could open it if they were ready to receive, and they can close it if actually what I want to do is get my head down and do my best work.
But in open plan offices is I end up with my noise cancelling headphones and I just play grey noise over my ears because I'm like,
Like, I wonder if that's why Nicola Slack was so problematic, because even though you can like silence your notifications, you would still see the little red button. So essentially your virtual door is always open and you don't have the ability to really focus and get what you need to get done. And part of what like gives me pride about my job is being able to do a lot of things and get them done in a very timely fashion. And I think I struggled with having the ability to never really shut my virtual door. So that could potentially be something that introverts are dealing with as well, because even though you are working from home and you're not with everyone, you're still getting stimulated by the sounds of your Slack or whatever messenger you're using going off, or the little red thing ticking numbers, you know, if you've turned off your notifications.
I've turned all of my notifications off.
Me too.
Well, but I'm the type of person that if I see it, even the little red thing saying like you have a notification, I have to look at it.
I don't have any of those little red dots.
Me neither.
Okay. Like,
no,
I'm just talking like specifically just for work.
Like I'll keep my emails with the little red dot, because I think because I respond to emails the fastest, so I leave my emails to get the little red dot. But every single app I have, it's the first thing I switch off is notifications and the little red badge. And that way I can choose when I go in and check. Like, I'm not saying I'm not going to check it for like 72 weeks. Now, brown cow. But I will check it on a daily basis, but when I'm ready.
I don't know. I think it's just like a personal thing that like if I see a notification, even if it didn't go off like audio, like if the bing didn't go off, I'm still like, I still have to see what it is. I wonder though if that's also part of the nature of what I do, because we are on timelines and you know, you miss a message and you don't respond, you're a day late to delivery or 3 days late, and then it's like a whole thing. So I wonder if there's a little element of that that's just, you know, specific to me and what I do. But I knew, but back to what Joanna was saying, I never felt in our toxic workplace, Nicola, that I had the ability to shut everything off, because everything was a fire that had to be put out right then and there, you know?
But, you know, we've spoken about it where it was like, even on my recharge days, on my days off, it was, oh, I know it's your day off, but.
Yep.
How many times did that happen? Like every single time I took a day off, every single time.
I know it did. Inevitably it did. And then 2012, I was working for a company and they did have a loft, like open plan office. The owner of the company, it was a fairly small company, like maybe like under 10 employees probably. And I don't know, Joanna, I would love insight on this, but instead of like coming over and talking to me about something, she would email it to me. Like she'd be like, I'm very disappointed in how you handled X, Y, and Z via email, when literally she's 20 feet away. It drove me fucking nuts. Why?
Wait, hold on a second. Let's just pause there for a second. Maybe she was an introvert that didn't.
Well, that's why I want to know what Joanna has to say about that. Because I think to me, that was, now looking back and knowing what we know about toxic workplaces, that's like prime way to start something toxic, because instead of just being like, hey, Gina, I have a question, or, you know, hey, Nicola, can we just chat about X, Y, and Z real quick? It always felt like I was being scolded behind like closed doors. And then I would have to literally type back to her. And she's like right there. I could see her out of the corner of my eye. I thought it was so asinine.
So bizarre.
Yeah. I don't think that's introvert related. I think that for me, that smacks of a lack of confidence and a lack of assertiveness. And extroverts can lack assertiveness and confidence as well. So in the same way that extroverts can have social anxiety, how bad is that I need social interaction to recharge my batteries, and yet I'm scared of the very interaction I need, but it happens. So for me, the only way to deliver feedback is face-to-face, or at least on a call like this, if we're in different parts of the world, followed up with an email so that I've got an audit trail. And the one word we never, ever, ever, ever use is disappointed. Why?
Oh.
Because the time we're told we're disappointed is usually by parents or school teachers, or, you know, when we're little. And so it kicks us straight into that parent-child interaction, has us feeling small, and as you say, kind of being reprimanded for something. So you can use any other emotion when you're being assertive and giving feedback, but never disappointed, ever, ever.
Can we just pause here for a second and remind people that if this podcast is something you enjoy, we would love to hear from you.
You can find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube at Let's Break Up Toxic Workplace Stories.
Sharing and subscribing really helps us feel validated. I think one of the things that I've started doing this year, because I've become a little bit more hyper aware around neurodiversity in the workplace. And I know previously, the label on it, that extrovert bias, is we usually just book meetings and we're like, oh, one-on-one chat, or, you know, let's go for a coffee catch up or whatever. But now what I've started doing is I've started putting like a summary of not specifically what I want to talk about, but just like a high level, hey, these are some of the topics I want to cover. And that way it gives everybody the opportunity to know, hey, this isn't, no one's getting a disappointment chat today.
Yes.
Or like a warning, because that's anytime someone would do that to me, I'd be like, oh my God, they're going to fire me.
Yeah,
even
I
though
also
like,
get that, like, I think that's also trauma now though.
what is that, Joanna? Why, like, when someone's like, or I remember when I was in corporate America, like, you know, in like 2005, God, I would see like my manager talking to someone else in like in her office, and I'd be like, it's probably about me. They're probably getting ready to fire me. Like, what is that? It's like that, you know, now looking back, I'm like, I was probably just like the lowest on their totem pole. They didn't give a shit about me. But why do we think that way?
I think there's a whole raft of reasons. And one of the things that I've noticed with most introverts is they have a louder inner critic, a more insistent inner critic than extroverts do. Or even if it's not louder, they tune in and they listen to it more than extroverts listen to their inner critic. Because we all have an inner critic. It's one of our sub-personalities. So I developed a process where I got to meet my inner critic. Her name's Gladys, by the way. She looks like a cross between Dobby the house elf and Gollum. So that waxy skin, huge watery eyes, terrified, because most of us, our inner critic is trying to keep us safe. And what we need to do is understand what it's keeping you safe from. So mostly, probably it was the inner critic and the self-talk chatter that was saying they're talking about you because you're not hitting the mark. You know, you've got to do better if you want to keep your job here. And that's the kind of the job of the inner critic.
Yeah.
So
that actually makes a lot of sense. Because somebody once told me, like, you're not that important. That's just your ego. And I think there's probably a little bit of that too. Like, you're not the center, like you're your center of your own universe, but you're certainly not the center of everybody else's universe. And which I think is really hilarious, because I was working at Wall Street at the time in like this huge international company. And it's like, that actually probably is a 50-50 mix of me being, you know, ego driven and also like the inner critic. But I think that's a really good thing to do, Nicola, because for people like me and Joanna, like we automatically think the worst thing possible. It's
I
like
always
when
go to the worst. I'm like, oh, babes, oh my God, you're gonna, what have I done wrong? I don't feel like I've done something wrong. Have I done something wrong? Oh my God. Are we having a wrong
But actually, where you and I met, I never thought I did anything wrong, but apparently I was doing everything wrong.
Yeah, that's
So-
because you're a bitch and you were
That's because I'm
condescending.
condescending and rude and I don't fluff my emails and I don't lead with kindness. That was one of their that phrase, Joanna, just so you know, is one of their core what was it? Core
Dr.
values.
Seussisms.
Which to me I was like,
Yeah.
this is so fucking lame. Lead with kindness.
Push it to the level of toxic positivity where we're just diminishing everyone's actual feelings.
And we
Yeah,
don't really care
absolutely.
about anything. I think my favorite one was speak now or forever hold your peace.
Oh no, you couldn't speak.
But then there was a contradictory one, which was say what you mean and mean what you say. Okay, so if I realize that I didn't say what I meant and meant what I said, but the issue has passed a little bit, does that mean I can't say it because I didn't say it? Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Joanna, it drove me bananas.
Yeah.
And I technically the reason why I was let go, even though I resigned like not even 12 hours earlier, was because I went against all of their core values.
Interesting. And yet what we're hearing around those core values is that they weren't actually meaningful or helpful. And most organizations who do a vision and values exercise will have things that are what a friend of mine calls hygiene values, like integrity. So what, we're going to act without integrity unless I put integrity on the wall? You know, it's a nonsense. I think there is something here about, and it goes back to the other question you asked about kind of, you know, fluffing things up. I think there is a sense of, because introverts don't have much patience with small talk, we don't do all the you know, how are you stuff. What we want to do is,
Is that why I hated fluffing my emails? Because I don't have the tolerance for small talk? Because that makes so much sense.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I love this. Sorry I interrupted you. It was just like a light
No,
bulb
that's
moment.
fine. And that's why many introverts don't do particularly well at networking. They're okay once they're in conversation, but that whole kind of, you know, hi, how are you? Did you have a good journey here? Nonsense really doesn't work well with introverts. What we like are those generative conversations that kind of open our minds and take our thinking somewhere else. We're not interested in who did what at the weekend. It kind of doesn't interest us really.
2 questions. My first question is, like, how does this end up kind of translating into kind of bullying and discrimination in workplaces? Because I know that this can be really, like, I know introverts specifically can be an easy target. Yeah. And then the next question I have around that is, what can we do as leaders, as people in workplaces, introverts in workplaces? What can we do to better equip the organization to not be toxic? And what can we do to better equip our introverts so that they feel included?
So 3 questions then, really. That's cheeky, Nicola. That's really cheeky.
It was one combined.
So the whole bullying thing, and for me, this comes back to another pet hate of most introverts, which is office banter. It's only bants, isn't it? It's only banter. And what that usually means is I'm taking the piss out of someone who probably isn't going to respond, who probably isn't going to talk back because they didn't join us when we went for a drink after work yesterday, or when we were all talking about our weekend on a Monday morning. They said, I just had a quiet weekend, and it's like, oh, boring, not that again. So there is something that just by being an introvert, it's almost like, you're right, we are easy prey. So for the bullying, because unlike Gina, who, you know, is openly kind of open about her assertiveness, it's something that many introverts have still to develop, because true assertiveness comes from, if we use one of the definitions, which is standing up for my rights and wants whilst respecting the rights and wants of other people. Many introverts have got to that place of thinking, I don't have any rights because people keep telling me that I'm rubbish, that that I'm not worthy of being promoted, because most introverts, the thing they complain about is being overlooked and undervalued. And because it's the louder ones who push themselves forward, who speak up, are the ones who are being rewarded and promoted. And so it's kind of an insidious slide into bullying and harassment in some ways, victimization maybe, because actually it comes back to that lack of psychological safety. We don't feel safe being ourselves. We don't feel safe to say, I had a fabulous weekend because I did absolutely nothing. I saw no one and I walked around the lake twice. We don't
That
feel
sounds
okay
amazing, by the way.
That does sound amazing. Is that what you did this last weekend? Because now I'm
Because
curious.
yes, sign me up to do it silently next to you next weekend.
I've been called Billy No Mates. I've been called stuck up. I've been called a loner. I've been called all sorts of things. And because my husband's quite quiet, we've been together nearly 40 years. So we know each other pretty well. But when we go out for dinner, we don't chatter all the way through dinner. Sometimes we just, what we talk about being is loving being in companionable silence. We love each other's company. We're enjoying the food. We're enjoying the wine. We're enjoying where we are. And I see people looking at us and going, oh, look, that old couple over there, they haven't got anything to say to each other anymore. That must be really sad. And it's like, no, it's wonderful. Just let us enjoy this savoring of our food, this moment.
The silent moment that we're enjoying.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I really identify with that.
But for me, this comes down to boundaries. And boundaries is something else that many introverts don't have put in place well enough. And so many introverts need to learn how to, especially to protect themselves from these toxic environments, is really need to figure out, what is my boundary? What is acceptable? Tony Gaskins has this lovely phrase, which is, you teach people how to treat you by what you allow, stop, and what you reinforce. I think it's those three things: what you allow, what you stop, and what you reinforce. And for me, that says everything I need to know about my boundaries. What am I prepared to allow people to do or say? What am I not prepared to? And what actually is the good behavior that I want to reinforce? And that helps me put in place boundaries, because many of us have boundaries, but we've never thought about them. And then we don't articulate them. So when somebody steps over, it's like a big shock. Well, you didn't tell me that was where your boundary was. It's like, no, let's almost make it like a fence, a picket fence painted white. Then everyone knows where that boundary is. So then people know when they're getting close to it, and they know when they've stepped over it. But we're not mind readers. We need to be clear about, for me, this is where my boundary is. And I'm just letting you know, so that we keep this relationship on a good footing.
Places that are like toxic workplaces, the boundaries are, and Nicola and I talked about this, I think in episode 3, about how it was very cult-like. The boundaries are ever so slightly pushed until you don't even realize that they're pushed to a place of unacceptability.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened at our place. Yeah.
And that's why being really clear about where your boundaries are, and being prepared to assert your boundaries, to defend them every time there's even the tiniest push, means that what you're doing is you're honoring your own boundaries. And if sometimes we do want to move them, and it's okay if you consciously move your boundary, rather than it's like your neighbor sneaking the fence over a bit and kind of stealing a bit of your ground all the time.
That's exactly what it was.
Looking in hindsight, if we think about one of your staff members, the one that took off a lot of time, there was them asserting their boundaries, and they actually took that time off. They didn't respond to Slacks, emails, and other stuff. And they were probably ahead of the game in that regard, where they had already seen through the bullshit that we'd dealt with and started putting their boundaries in place to keep themselves safe.
Yeah, I mean, also with that particular person, Nicola, I had my own issue, because there was not a sense of urgency in the way that she worked. And
for sure, we know that.
Yeah. So it kind of made me doubly frustrated when it was like pulling teeth to get stuff out of her and to get things done. And I'm trying, to affect change in a positive way that's going to help everyone on my team. And for her to be out all the time, it was like just a kick in the ass again, because she wouldn't respond. And I'd be like, okay, she barely responds when she's here.
I obviously don't know the context of it, but for me, that's what I would be encouraging people to do, is once you're in your own time, then actually not responding is the right thing to do. We have become so obsessed with everyone being available 24/7, which again is fine for the extroverts, but for the introverts, it's really intrusive, because that's the time I need to recharge. And now you're kind of crashing into my personal time. How do you expect me to show up and do good work tomorrow if you're not allowing me the recharge time today?
Yeah. And yeah, there might not have been urgency there, but that might have been lack of experience versus urgency.
But I also think that goes back to management, because they weren't planning properly. So we had to pick up the slack.
I was just going to say that. I remember, so when I was still working in BT, so I'm going back to the 80s or early 90s now, somebody had this brilliant sign on their desk which said, "A lack of planning on your part does not constitute a crisis on mine."
Yes.
And that is so often.
That should have been our core value.
That should have been our core value. That Dr. Seussism, I am there for that one. That was the perfect core value.
No, but that's actually, it means something. But yeah, sorry, go ahead, Joanna.
No, I was just going to say, and for me, there is that sense of, I'm not going to bust my gut. If you've been sitting on this and could have actioned it earlier and haven't, and now you're panicking, and all you've done is push the pressure onto me, not the work itself. And that's the thing where we need boundaries in place, and where we need to assert our boundaries.
Okay, so Joanna, I'm super curious now to kind of like circle us all the way back around and kind of go through some of the things that we can do to prevent creating these toxic environments for introverts.
As managers, leaders, etc.
As everybody in the workplace, essentially.
Yeah. So I think it's going to come back to the psychological safety bit for me. And I think it's Tim Martin, or I can't remember his name, but he has this brilliant model of the different layers of psychological safety. And I think if we were to honor those, it would remove a lot of the toxicity almost immediately. I mean, it will take time to apply, but his first layer is this inclusivity piece, where we can all be ourselves, who we truly are, and we are accepted for that. So, that is absolutely diversity and inclusion in a nutshell, that bit just there. His next layer up, I think, is then, so that's about inclusion safety. I'm safe to be who I am in this environment. The next layer up is then around either learner or contribute. I think it's learner safety. So the learner safety level is about, I'm human, I will make mistakes, not intentionally, but I will make mistakes. And it's often the way we learn. And I feel safe to make mistakes here without being ridiculed, without being carpeted, without being blamed, provided we then work together to help me figure out how not to make that mistake again, and we put right whatever needs putting right. So that learner safety is incredibly important. Do you know how many people don't ask questions because they're terrified of letting someone know that they don't really know what they're doing, that they're struggling, that they're finding their way through things? So that learner safety is important. There's then contributor safety, which is that I can say my piece, even if I think it might be silly, even if I think it's not quite hitting the mark, even if I haven't thought it through yet, which is why I might need to do that pre-frame thing of, I haven't thought this through properly yet, but what I'm thinking about is X. And have people say, well, that's really interesting. Let's explore that a bit. Even if I am the most junior and the new person, I still have that contributor safety. So I can speak up at whatever time. I don't have to speak now or forever hold my peace. I can speak whenever it's relevant. And then the top level, and these are like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they build on each other. The top level is I then have challenger safety, where wherever I am in the organization, can turn to anyone and say, is that right? Does that make sense? Is there not a better way to do things? Can we not explore that? I'm not sure I agree with you, whatever that challenger safety means. And once we have that real psychological safety in place, or as we put that psychological safety in place, for me, a lot of the toxicity disappears.
What if you have a leader who doesn't know what they're doing, like shouldn't be leading?
Then people, and we often have this, that the people below know that and see that, but nobody is challenging. Nobody is doing anything about it. And so for me, I would rather be fired for challenging than staying somewhere with somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. Dr. Amy Edmondson, who actually coined the phrase psychological safety, in her brilliant TED talk around the Chilean miners, it's a TED talk about teaming. She talks about the importance of situational humility, where leaders are brave enough to say, I haven't got a clue. We've never done this before. Let's figure this out together. So they don't bullshit everyone. They don't blag it and pretend that they know what they're doing. They're actually prepared to say, hey, this is new territory for us all. Let's figure this out together. And that situational humility is such an important part of psychological safety again.
My last question, because I know we're getting short on time, is what made you really decide to become like a champion for introverts? Like, we know you're an introvert, but was there something like a precipitating one factor or something that you were just like, I fucking had it. Let me try to
Come
forge
at
a
me.
path. Yeah.
I think it was a straw that broke the camel's back situation. And wherever I was working in the world, I noticed the same thing. And I know that we notice what we look for, right? So maybe I was looking for it. But wherever I worked, it was the quiet ones who keep their head down and do good work, who were getting overlooked and undervalued. And I got mad enough to say, this has to stop. So I'd been aware of it, obviously, for a very long time. And I think there's something about age that made me braver, made me care less about whether I upset people, made me decide that this is the mission I'm on until I turn my toes up. And a bit like you, if I make a difference to half a dozen introverts, I will be happy that I'm doing the right thing, because I am on a mission to shift this extroversion bias and to enable introverts to flourish. And that's what I'm here on this earth to do.
Love that.
I mean, I think it's pretty noble. I learned a lot from you, Joanna.
Yeah, this has been a really great conversation, because I think it's really timely as well, because we've been, I don't want to say we've been negative, but we have highlighted super toxic workplaces.
We've just been super gossipy. I don't think it's negative, but super gossipy. Yeah, go ahead.
Super.
But it's those real tangible examples that people can relate to, then go, oh my God, yeah, I had some of that. As in the same way that you were saying, I wouldn't have necessarily badged it as toxic. People are now saying, actually, it is. This is not acceptable. So let's do something about it.
Now, where are all the awesome places that people can find you?
So probably the easiest place is flourishingintroverts.com, my website that's got my free downloadable resources, my podcast, my TED Talk, my TV show, little courses that I offer, occasional blogs. It's all there in the one place. And LinkedIn is where you'll find me most active. I do have an introvert group. I do have a business page on Facebook. Thank you.
Because I think you're a really valuable resource for people who are, ready to enter like the
conversation,
or just like, how can I improve myself? Like, as a leader, I always want to know how I can improve, because I don't know anything, like I know stuff, but I don't know at the end of the day, like we all don't know what we're doing. So like, let's all figure it out together.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it's really highlighted that I potentially have some extroversion bias, because I've been trained to be an extrovert in the workplace as an introvert. And now I'm like, actually, I'm doing myself a disservice, and I'm doing other introverts I know a disservice by performing at a level that is, in my mind, expected, and essentially is expected by society. So let's maybe reassess that a little bit.
Yeah, nice. Nice. In that case, my work here is done. Thank you.
This was an invaluable discussion. And
Thank you for joining us today. If you would like to share your story, we would love to hear from you.
Also, leaving a review helps us create more content because it shows us there's an interest in this topic.
For those of our listeners who do better with reading, we have closed caption available on YouTube.
See you next week, same time and same place.